I'm also okay. No problem. What are we supposed to do, Prashant? Are we to wait for more people to join?
Yes, sir. I will wait for a few more minutes.
Prashant, we better get started because I would like to try and finish this today. Okay, we can't wait indefinitely, no. And then again, because the Zoom shuts off on its own. So since we don't have the liberty of extending the class, I think we'll start off.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was basically talking to you about how originally political philosophy was supposed to be a mirror of reality. And then I also told you that in more ways than one, there is no doubt that political philosophy does mirror political reality. And I had given you examples of Plato. Plato's Republic was written in the aftermath of Athens losing a protracted war with Sparta, and that war is called the Peloponnesian War. And the Peloponnesian War lasted 18 years. And at the end of it, the Athenian leader Pericles gave a famous speech to the people of Athens, in which he claimed that there were a lot of weaknesses in Athens because of the lack of physical discipline, physical fitness, all things which were there among the Spartans, but absent among the Athenians. So you see, there is this whole idea of Pericles saying a number of things, and the Periclean oration, as it is popularly called, and the idea of you know the loss, not the idea, the loss of the Peloponnesian War made Plato look at a philosophy that would make Athens the best polis, POLIS, in the Greek world, which is also called the Hellenic world. Hellenic. Hellenes is a province, and so Hellenic world is also what it is called. And then I told you that if you look at John Locke had talked about the fact that those who had property were more rational than those who did not have property. Okay, and this for us looks like an absolutely ridiculous idea, because today we say there is an accident of birth. People do not choose their parents, and those who are uh, poor are not poor by choice. It's just that they have been born into poverty. And there are those people who are born into riches. And again, it is just an accident of birth which has made them rich people. And they're already rich at the time of birth. So, are we to say that they are more rational than those who are born to poor families? Obviously, we can't agree with this. But if you do look at the times in which Plato was living, I had told you that feudalism had lost its ability to generate social wealth. And with the uh, this loss of ability to generate social wealth came poverty. And poverty uh, impoverished everyone. It impoverished the servants, it impoverished even the feudal lords. The feudal lords who used to have castle towns were in no position to maintain those anymore. So, as a result of that, people were looking for fresh opportunities. And that is when the Europeans started coming on the Silk Route uh, to China and India, and capitalism came into being. Those who took the opportunities that were offered by capitalism, they were able to become rich. Okay, it is it. I, if you remember, I gave you the example of what happened when the high-tech city in Hyderabad came. Uh, One of the highlights of that was it brought big multinational companies. It brought Microsoft, it brought Google, it brought Facebook, it brought a number of other companies. And this not only gave opportunities of earning to software professionals, but also to a lot of ancillary uh, industries. Most of these needed cabs to transport their workers, I mean, their employees. So, cab companies flourished. A lot of people bought new cabs and started sending them to these companies. And with that came the jobs of drivers. And then we see that there is also the jobs of security guards. So there was prosperity at that time. That is the kind of prosperity that Locke was talking about. You know, when a new situation, a greenfield situation happens, it brings many opportunities. But once those who take those opportunities are the ones who can see that there is a future for them, and those who don't take those opportunities obviously have missed the bus. But high-tech city today is not what it was when it came into being in the first place. You don't have all those jobs available now. They have already been taken, most of them. And therefore, we now see different problems with the high-tech city. City planners say that, it was a very bad idea to create one high-tech city in one corner, because that meant, people had to commute from various places to all the way to Madhapur and all. So today it becomes a matter of criticism. So those who criticize the idea of a high-tech city and those who are the activist groups that are protesting against the pharmaceutical city that the present Telangana government wants to set up somewhere, they are all claiming that these will, worsen the quality of life in the city. Okay, you might run a metro, but the metro doesn't go to all the areas. It doesn't even cover 1/10 of the city, right? And with prosperity, people have started buying more and more vehicles. And if you look at Bangalore, for example, we still haven't reached that stage. We are reaching, but Bangalore is chock-a-block. In the morning, one side of the road you can travel. In the evening, if you try to do that, then you are told, no, this is a one way now. You have to go in the, or you can only drive in the opposite direction. Okay, in the morning you drive from east to west. In the evening you drive from west to east. And there are so many traffic snarls. There are so many jams. And sometimes there is a gridlock where vehicles do not move for, half an hour, 40 minutes. They don't move even a millimeter. So it now brings problems. At one time, it seemed like, yes, this is manna from heaven, and we are going to have great fun. So that is precisely what happened with John Locke. He looked at the beginnings of capitalism. He looked at the defense of private property. And he said those who have private property, who have a minimum private property, are the ones who have shown that they can take care of themselves. But by the time Rousseau comes, it changes. Rousseau says that capitalism throws up a paradox. It throws up a paradox of poverty amidst plenty. Initially, yes, many sections of society benefit from the opportunities offered by capitalism. But after 150 years of capitalism having existed, then you start seeing the problems with it. And therefore, Rousseau said that there is a paradox of poverty amidst plenty. In the feudal time, everybody became poor, including the feudal lords, the kings, everybody became poor. But by the time capitalism took firm root, you see, there were some people who were very rich, and then there were those who were not at all rich. So present day Mumbai is a great example of that. I told you once, if you have a Mukesh Ambani who has a 24-storied building as his own house only for his family meaning his wife and children, then the same Bombay has the biggest, or Mumbai has the same biggest slum in the world, the Dharavi slum. So you see, this is the coexistence of riches with rags, or the coexistence with plenty with poverty. Mukesh Ambani can buy 3 or 4 planes, but people in Dharavi don't get even 2 meals to eat. So that is the kind of thing. So Rousseau's philosophy mirrors that. Okay. Now, having said that, I also told you that in the German Enlightenment, there are 3 enlightenments that you should remember. The first enlightenment is the Renaissance that took place in Italy, but somehow had its effect more thanks to the Reformation in England. And England was this particular country that took advantage of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and went on to Industrial Revolution, and it was therefore able to dominate the world. Okay, so the second Enlightenment is the French Enlightenment. And this French Enlightenment is a pessimistic Enlightenment. If you see the works of Rousseau, and if you look at some of the painters, not wall painters, artists who paint things, they have very pessimistic themes. You know, Jericho, Gericault, Jericho essentially painted shipwrecks to show how man was helpless in the face of the fury of nature. Till then, people were thinking they can control everything. They can control even nature. Okay, so he started showing shipwrecks and people clinging desperately to rafts. Okay, and the fury of nature, I have felt it myself the other day. I have sent some of you my pictures. We were helpless. We couldn't do anything in water. So that is the reality. So that reality is mirrored by Rousseau's philosophy and the paintings of people like Jericho and Turner. And Marx was even more obsessed with the idea of why there is poverty amidst plenty. So he attempted what he called a scientific answer to that. And that he found to be the idea of how the capitalist extracts surplus from the worker, and instead of paying the worker for his time, he makes him work for 18 hours a day, but pays him only for 8 hours a day. But the worker is productive for 18 hours a day. So he said the rest of the money that is earned because of the productivity of the laborer, that money is something that is appropriated to himself by the capitalist who does nothing. He's only invested. And he says, if I didn't invest and if I didn't give you opportunities to work, where would you have made money from? So this, according to him, is surplus extraction, which leads to profit. But Marx didn't stop there, neither did Rousseau. Rousseau gave the idea of a proper democracy, but he preferred a city state to a nation state. He said in a city state, every single person can participate in the democratic process. But nation states, we have representative democracy. And you know how it is. Let us say there's a constituency of 100 people, and there are two candidates, A and B, contesting. 51 people vote for A, 49 people vote for B. We have a simple majority system. This simple majority system, what does it do? It essentially says that the person with 51 votes is the winner. But please remember, if he's going to represent you in the parliament or in the legislative assembly, then he is also representing the 49 people who didn't want him. So he said this democracy, this liberal democracy, is nonsense. He said, ultimately, if you look at liberal democracy, it is nothing but complete rubbish. That is what he said. And so he proposed an alternative society of the future. All right, just as Rousseau did. Now, so you see, by the time we come to the third enlightenment, and this Marx actually came after the third enlightenment, the third enlightenment is the German enlightenment, in which you have people like Arthur Schopenhauer, Immanuel Kant, Hölderlin, uh, and this is even more pessimistic compared to the French Enlightenment. And these people uh, propounded philosophies which were which pointed out the insignificance of man. Okay, and therefore, if you look at what is today called Gothic art, you know, the Germans were called Goths. They were two or three tribes of Goths: Ostrogoths, Visigoths. So the Germans they evolved out of uh, three tribes that I know of: the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, and the Angles, Angle. The Angles were from the Saxony province and they went to England. Okay, and that is why uh, England's population is called Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Okay, the Angla people, and the language initially, the language that they spoke was some kind of German, but it was called Angla. And it's a very interesting thing that Telugu is the only language in the world that calls that language by its original name, which is Angla, Angla Bhasha, right? Similarly, Telugu is also again the only language in the world which calls Jesus by the name that he was given. The name that was given to Jesus was Yesu. Yesu Prabhu, that is what they say in Telugu. Okay, Jesus is Anglicization, Jesus is Spanish. Okay, so all those are not the correct names. Somehow this Telugu language has the correct pronunciation. Beats me how it did that. Anyway, so you see, people have started suggesting newer kind of societies, newer kind of philosophies. And in the aftermath of the German Enlightenment, you have Hegel. Hegel is called the high priest of modernity. He says there's nothing wrong with modern civilization. The criticism leveled against it by the German Enlightenment and by the French Enlightenment, he says it's not a valid criticism. He says the greatest quality of the modern civilization is its ability to uh, use the rational prowess of mind to overcome problems. And he had his own notion of history, which I cannot go into right now. And Marx disagreed with this particular idea of his. So he wrote a separate version of history. Even though he was a part of the young Hegelian movement in Germany. He started as a young Hegelian, but he and his friend, Friedrich Engels, they moved away from Hegel, and they had to go in exile because they were preaching a revolution. So they went to England, which is where they survived to whatever extent and died. But what happened here is that you suddenly had the idea that modern civilization can be taken forward by getting over the problems that are there in it. This is the idea propounded by Hegel, and to a very, very limited extent by Immanuel Kant, who comes towards the end of the German Enlightenment, very limited extent. But he also believed in human rationality. Okay, and he talks about human rationality being a priori and a posteriori. I'll discuss this later. And it is on the basis of this that Hegel and Kant also brought morality back into this. And morality's definitions started varying. Hegel has his own definition of morality. Marx had his own definition of morality. Some were supporters of capitalism, others were not supporters of capitalism. The sociologist Max Weber believed that capitalism was a legal, rational society. So he disagreed with Marx. He said, Marx, by the way, if you read his Communist Manifesto of 1848, in that he writes glowing accounts of capitalism, how it freed the individual from the clutches of social control, how it made free thinking possible, how it allowed rationality in individuals to bloom or blossom. So he wrote all these things, but he said this didn't last forever. Capitalism showed its own this thing, and he said history is infinite. And he never said communism will happen on its own. Okay, a lot of people will argue with you and tell you Marx said communism will happen on its own. He never said it will happen on its own. He said you should have the realization that you are being exploited, you being the worker, and you should revolt against the capitalism with a bloody revolution, make workers out of the capitalists, and stop the state from being an instrument of class exploitation. That's what he said. In opposition to this, you have Max Weber, who says we don't need a revolution. Whatever problems come in capitalism, these can be taken care of within the framework of capitalism, because capitalism is a legal, rational system, and through the rational process, people make laws. There can be courts of law in which people will decide what is right, what is wrong, and that is how you will overcome the problems that are thrown up in a capitalist society. You don't have to go into a communist society, is what Max Weber said. So he disagreed with him, with Marx. It's not just Max Weber who disagreed, though Max Weber is a German. The other person who disagreed with Marx is the French thinker, Emil Durkheim, E-M-I-L-E, Emil, D-U-R-K-H-E-I-M. Emil Durkheim was part French and part German. He lived in France. He wrote in French. Emil Durkheim has a theory. He says that capitalist civilization is a rational civilization. He says what it is seeing is a bit of a crisis that can be overcome by constructing human society as an organic solidarity and not as a mechanical solidarity. So he said the problems of capitalism are because of the fact that people are still living their lives as if they are in a mechanical solidarity. So he said religious laws are the main reason why some people remain backward. Okay, he said religious laws are the main reason why people remain backward because nobody understands religious laws. Okay, the term used for that was by Hegel. He used the term dead objectivity. Dead objectivity is one time maybe people knew why and how they were practicing certain laws, but now they don't know. They just do it without knowing what it is. And that is what Durkheim calls mechanical compliance. Okay. And automaton conformity, unthinking conformity. That becomes automaton conformity. An automaton is a machine, right? Something that is automated. So you're like a machine, and obviously you don't understand what you're doing. So obviously you have problems. So he said the necessity is to transform these mechanical solidarities into what he called organic solidarities. Okay, so what is the difference? A mechanism, an automaton, or something which is in the nature of a machine only does what you ask it to do, right? Even today, though we say our cell phones have smart technology, and we say computers have smart technology, they are still doing things at our bidding. Their artificial intelligence has not yet reached a stage where it can become a threat to human intelligence. Though people like Elon Musk, if they succeed in what they are doing, we might all become people without jobs. Okay, the machines will do all the work. Then how do we earn? Even to buy machines, we need to earn something. And if the machines are only doing things, and how will we earn? So those who portray a dystopia, dystopia, dystopia is the opposite of utopia. Utopia is where everybody is happy, everybody is comfortable. In a dystopia, the life is exactly the opposite of what it is in an utopia. Okay, it is something which would be horrible, unbearable, and already, if you look at history, there were people like George Orwell who believed in the potential of communism, not capitalism, mind you. Marxist communism, he thought will deliver people out of the misery that had been imposed upon them by capitalism. But it didn't. And the Russians, who had their Bolshevik revolution, which they also call the working class revolution, and after that they established the Soviet Union, which consisted of 16 different countries, including Russia, some of them in Central Asia, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. All these are Central Asian republics. Then you had the European republics, Ukraine. It was called Byelorusia. Now they call it Belarus, and Russia itself. Okay, and parts of Finland, which were called Finnish Russia. So it was this huge thing, huge entity, and this huge entity they said, had a working class revolution. And they said, Lenin rather, the leader, said, we are going to establish the rule of the working class. And for that reason, we shall seize control of the state apparatus from the hands of the capitalists and the oppressors, and we shall make laws that favor the poor. That's what he said. And when Lenin was alive, he worked extremely hard for the realization of this. But unfortunately, Lenin did not live for very long. He was succeeded by Stalin, Stalin. And Stalin became the great dictator. And once he turned out to be a dictator, you see that there is a there is an opponent to Stalin in the form of Leon Trotsky, Leon, Leon, Trotsky, Trotsky. And Leon Trotsky said, this is not the dictatorship of the proletariat, this is dictatorship of Stalin. And Stalin believed that he should get rid of his opponents. So he put a death sentence on Trotsky's head. Trotsky managed to escape from the Soviet Union, and he went to Argentina, but Stalin chased him all the way to Argentina and got him assassinated in Argentina. Okay, so this is nothing but politics of vindication. And Stalin also secretly entered into a no-war pact with Hitler. But Hitler got greedy, broke the no-war pact, and attacked the Soviet Union, which brought it into the war on the side of the Allies. The Allies, you know, the First World War and Second World War. I'm talking now of the Second World War. In the Second World War, you see that, you know, the USA was not at all comfortable having any kind of alliance with the USSR, because the USSR was a communist country. And even today, if you say in public in the USA that you are a Marxist, they'll be keeping a tab on you. The Federal Bureau of Investigation will track everything that you do. You get surveilled. And if you say, I believe in communism, then they'll come one day, trump some charges, not Trump as Donald Trump, trumped up charges or made up charges of how you are a threat to the democracy of the United States of America, and you'll be put in jail. So you see, they were not at all they were not at all comfortable with the idea of having an alliance with the USSR. But it was desperate times, because both France and England were more or less decimated. And had Hitler stopped there, things would have been fine. He would have had all things under control. He broke the pact with Stalin, attacked Russia, and that became USSR, and that became his undoing. Okay, and so people lost faith in communism as something that would be a better solution, because in Europe, a number of young people believe that would be a better solution to the kind of capitalist life that they were leading. They were all disillusioned. Among them, one of the persons who was very disillusioned was the great writer George Orwell, Orwell. Orwell. Orwell wrote two books, one which is called The Animal Farm, and the second book is what he called 1984. He calls The Animal Farm a fable, okay? And in that, the animals revolt against their human owner, kick them out, kick the owner out, and they start running the farm on their own. But the pigs are symbolic of greed. The pigs start behaving like human beings and they become the leaders of the animal farm. So that is the dystopia that he wrote. 1984, he wrote it in 1948, and this was his vision of how 1984 would be. He said, in 1984, you'll have a big brother watching you, surveillance. You'll be surveilled everywhere you go, you will be surveilled. I don't know if I told you this, I think I did. Hyderabad is the 7th most surveilled city in the world. The 6 cities that are there before us are all Chinese cities. Hyderabad is the 7th most surveilled city in the world, and the next two are London and New York. Okay, so no other city in India is surveilled like Hyderabad. Okay, so what you are looking at is a situation in 1984 where the big brother is the state. It is going to watch what you're doing. And I don't know if you heard this interview with a software programmer who is a contractor to the government of Andhra Pradesh post the splitting of the state. Post the splitting of the state, he was a contractor. Contractor meaning he worked on contract with the government of Andhra Pradesh. And he says Chandrababu Naidu basically collected data of citizens from the internet and from various other sources, and those whom he thought will be a threat to him, he got those people's names deleted from the voters list. So these people turned up at polling booths and found that they could not vote because their names are not on the voters list. This was made public by the programmer who did this work. And what is the CAA and NRC? It is nothing but a cover to see who is against the BJP and who is not, who is for the BJP. Okay. Now, how insidious is the intent of the BJP is a matter of anybody's guess. It could be that they will just remove the names of them from the voters list, or it could also be that they'll use the UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. So they can trump up some charges and say you are if you say something about against Narendra Modi, please be careful. If you say anything against Narendra Modi or Amit Shah or the BJP or the RSS, you have freedom of speech. You technically you can say these things, but if you are caught saying these things, you can be put under UAPA in a jail, and you will not even have habeas corpus, which is produce the body. You have to be produced within 24 hours of arrest. You have to be produced before law court. But according to UAPA, you're the enemy of the state, so you don't have to be produced before the law court. So your people won't know where you have disappeared. So please be careful. If you are again, don't speak against the government. You can, UAPA doesn't involve the government. It says, I don't want to be a part of India, then you are in trouble, technically. But if you say, I don't like BJP, that also can land you in the same soup. So please be careful. I'm not overreacting. And another thing that you have to remember is that with all these dystopias and with the resurgence of liberalism once again, the focus shifted to language. Okay, the focus shifted entirely to language, and people started saying that the construction of a reality should be understood through the usage of the language used by a political philosopher or a writer. Okay, you should understand what his inclinations are, why he is doing what he is doing through his language. So language and the theory of structuralism gained currency in the early 20th century itself, before all these things started happening. Before all these things started happening, you have people already saying one has to study the language that is being used in order to understand why such a political philosophy is being built. This study in Europe was called semiology. Semiology was used by a Swissman, Ferdinand, Ferdinand, Ferdinand de Saussure, Suassare. Ferdinand de Saussure is the name of the person. He used it as semiology, which is the study of symbols technically, but he believed that you don't have to, this says stop, this says go. That is not just semiology for him. Even the way you use words, the way you construct your sentences, that itself is symbolic of how you think. That is what Ferdinand de Saussure said, and it became semiology. Later on, Noam Chomsky, who started off as a linguistics professor, he introduced a slightly different notion and called it semiotics. Instead of semiology, he called it semiotics. And semiotics is a much more versatile kind of a concept than semiology is. And it is through semiotics, that usage of semiotics, that Noam Chomsky stopped being a professor of linguistics and turned into a political philosopher. Not just a political philosopher, he also turned into political activism. Uh, to it, not into, he turned to political activism. He says America is not a democracy, and he's right. It's an oligarchy. I've said this many times, and Chomsky says the same thing. He's very right about that. And another person who got into this is Charles Taylor, who is not a very big time philosopher, but he is somebody who is definitely, what should I say? He is somebody who is a political activist. And despite the fact that he is an octogenarian now, he still is a political activist. And he wrote a wonderful book, which I would advise you to read, which is Sources of the Self. And that is where he uses the idea of language. He says, when you say, I am so and so, I stand for these things. When I stand for a certain philosophy, or I am against a certain philosophy, or if I am for a certain political system, or if I am against a certain political system, you are defining yourself. Okay, you are saying, I am this. You are saying, my self is this. So he wrote this book called The Sources of the Self, in which he says it is your language, the way you use your language, that makes you somebody. It makes you a revolutionary, or it will make you a conformist, or it will make you somebody who is a right-winger or a left-winger. It is the language that you are used to listening to and the language that you use yourself that makes you a certain kind of a person. So I'll stop here today. We have come to the last point. Tomorrow I'll pick up this and finish this off with Claude Lévi-Strauss. We'll start with him and his anthropology, and then we'll talk a little bit about Louis Althusser and Jacques Derrida, and we'll finish it off. Thank you very much, the two of you who have been kind enough to attend my class today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye. See you tomorrow.